Well, welcome to our conversation with some young voices. Jeremiah Bell Jeter was one of the most prominent figures among the Baptists in America in the 19th century. He was editor of the Religious Herald, denominational statesman, pastor of several prominent churches. He also was the first president of the Virginia Baptist Historical Society. He is credited with saying that even if there were no more Baptists in the world, he would still be a Baptist. And I think what Dr. Jeter meant by that is that being Baptist is more a mindset than it is anything else. If you really study and absorb the historic Baptist principles and reflect upon them, then it would be very difficult to be anything other than a Baptist, even if you attend a church of another denomination or no church at all. You would be Baptistic once you accepted all of those principles. This afternoon and later this evening, we will be examining Baptist identity, who we were and who we are. This afternoon, we have an opportunity to eavesdrop on a conversation and later to join into that conversation. We're calling this Young Voices, a conversation on Baptist identity today. The Center for Baptist Heritage and Studies requested Robert H. Dilday, managing editor of the Religious Herald, to serve as the facilitator for this conversation. Robert keeps a finger on the pulse beat of Baptists today. What they think about, what they are thinking they think about. And then he uses all 10 of those fingers to pound out stories about Baptist thought and action. The panelists for the conversation are 6 of the younger generation of Baptists from across 3 states, North Carolina, Virginia, and Maryland. Now let me briefly introduce our 6 young voices. Alex Gallimore is at present Associate Pastor for Youth at Piney Grove Baptist Church in Mount Airy, North Carolina. He has just, hours ago, completed theological studies at the Divinity School of Wake Forest University. And this year he became a regular columnist for the Religious Herald. Alex and I talk the same language, Baptist heritage, and the same Deep South dialect, since we are both native Georgians. His wife Allison is on the staff of the CBF of North Carolina. Andrew Gardner. Andrew was appointed in 2010 as one of our own Heritage Fellows, a program of the Heritage Center. For his project, he visited several churches which perform extraordinary ministries and wrote his findings in a booklet which the Heritage Center published entitled Compassionate Churches. He is a recent graduate of the College of William and Mary and will soon take up Alex's warmed up seat, right? He's going to enter the Divinity School at Wake Forest University. He has served an internship for the Baptist Joint Committee on Religious Liberty, as well as the Associated Baptist Press. Stacy Noel. Stacy is Associate Pastor of the Harrisonburg Baptist Church in Harrisonburg, Virginia. She serves as a trustee of the Religious Herald and is on the National CBF Coordinating Council. She calls Wichita, Kansas as home. She earned her undergraduate degree from Baylor and a master's in divinity from McAfee School of Theology of Mercer University. Bailey Edwards Nelson is the pastor of the Flat Rock Baptist Church in Mount Airy, North Carolina, a town known by many as Mayberry, after the popular Andy Griffith show. Flat Rock Church is made of granite, for which Mount Airy is also famous. The church is hard by the granite quarry. It is a good thing that the church is made of stone because it has felt a number of quakes since the calling of a female pastor. Bailey is a graduate of McAfee School of Theology of Mercer University and previously a graduate of Furman University. Her husband, Justin, is a hospice chaplain. Bailey writes a blog for the Religious Herald, and in one of her recent blogs, she wrote about her balancing act as a pastor as well as a mother of a very active 2-year-old. Adam Bond is Assistant Professor of Historical Studies at the Samuel DeWitt Proctor School of Theology of Virginia Union University here in the city. He is passionate about Baptist history and heritage. He is a native of Wisconsin and a graduate of the University of Memphis, where he met his wife Rhonda, and a graduate also of Virginia Union. He earned his PhD in historical theology and church history from Marquette University. He has been teaching at Virginia Union for the last 4 years. And then John Ballinger. John's in the red tie. There he is. John finished his preparatory education at the International High School in Switzerland, where his parents had devoted their lives to theological education. He began his college work at Furman and completed it at the University of Virginia with a double major in English and German. He received his Master's of Divinity from Southern Seminary and earned a Doctor of Ministry degree at Bright Divinity School at Texas Christian University. He began his ministerial career serving as an associate to Dr. Daniel Bagby at 7th and James Baptist Church in Waco, Texas, and it was there that he met his wife, Susan. He has served as pastor of Woodbrook Baptist Church in Baltimore, Maryland, for about 9 years. Robert Dilday will get the conversation started, prompted, rolling, and continuing with some questions. Robert has become as familiar to those of us in Baptist life as the masthead of the paper which he helps produce. He came to Virginia in 1986 and has served as the associate to 3 editors of the Religious Herald. He has helped to bring it beyond just the print medium to electronic issues. He has rubbed elbows and dogged many a Baptist leader to get a story. This afternoon, he will keep the conversation going. Sometime deep into the conversation, Robert will turn to those of us up here in the gallery, and we can join into the conversation if we feel so led. And now, in the words of the late Maurice Sendak, the writer of the popular children's book, Where the Wild Things Are, let the wild ruckus begin.
Wow, I left all those questions at home. Should have brought them with me. Thanks, Fred. This will be a lot of fun. We'll start off with the question that I know everybody is wondering. You're all young. I mean, as Fred said, youthfulness starts to my right and goes that way. You have lots of options when it comes to your faith commitments, but you've chosen to be Baptist. What are those distinctive characteristics about being Baptist that you find compelling enough to let it form the basis for not only your spiritual lives, but also your professional lives? And Adam has drawn the short straw, so he's going to start off tonight.
Well, thank you, Robert, for the question, and thank you, Fred, for inviting me. It's an honor to be here among these esteemed panelists. I was telling Stacy, I believe it was, that Fred's talked about you all very highly, and then I come here and find out that he's met some of you just for the first time. So it's, that's neat. That is neat. In response to the question, the first answer I need to give is that I have always been Baptist. I mean, when I came into the world, I was born basically and bred and raised in a Baptist congregation. And so I have known nothing else but being Baptist. And I have to admit this, that if I did anything else besides being a Baptist, I might get kicked out of my family. And so that's not the most pressing reason why I'm still Baptist. I have come to appreciate the emphasis that Baptists place on freedom. And I have come to appreciate even more so the emphasis within the African American Baptist experience that has emphasized freedom, and how in the midst of the circumstances that many African Americans experience in this land, I mean even in this Commonwealth, the push was for freedom, and it's always been for freedom. Whether it be intellectual freedom, whether it be freedom from bondage, there has been this emphasis on freedom. And I believe that there is still a need for that Baptist emphasis on freedom, even within the circles that I frequent. Because to an extent, whether we talk about spiritual freedom, social freedom, political freedom, there are persons who are still somewhat illiterate when it comes to to knowing what it means to be free. And so that Baptist emphasis alone has kept me wed to Baptist life. Regardless of how critical I can be of it, and I can be critical of it, and I say this, I can be critical of it because I'm not going anywhere. It's like being in a marriage. You know, you can talk about each other, but you won't let anyone else talk about it, each other. But no, I love it. And so, I mean, I'm here for the long run when it comes to being Baptist.
Awesome. Panel, weigh in.
I would echo everything Adam has said. It's the freedom and the autonomy that draws me to the Baptist tradition as well. I've also been Baptist since birth, and I'm not going anywhere either. But I think when we look at the world today, especially here in America, Christianity across the board is in decline. Church membership is in decline. Secularism and pluralism is on the rise. And I think it's the Baptist principles of freedom and diversity and even maybe a little bit of dissent that can speak to these kind of cultural changes that are happening. And those are the kind of things that have captivated me. I remain haunted by the first great American Baptist, Roger Williams, who established Rhode Island Colony for people haunted and convicted by conscience. And I think in a world today that's crying out for multiple voices in the marketplace, in the religious marketplace, and for diversity in the religious marketplace and for freedom, that it's us as Baptists who can create those spaces and really speak to this kind of postmodern, secular, pluralistic age. And that's really why I have kind of remained firmly rooted in my Baptist tradition, because I think we're the ones who have what it takes to meet these changes ahead.
I have not always been a Baptist. I may be the lone person here. I've actually not always been a Christian. I came to faith when I was a teen. I ended up at Baylor University, which is sort of how I became a Baptist, but mostly when I took the Baptist Heritage course, I realized that Baptists believed all of the things I'd always sort of believed all along. And it did have to do with the freedom issue, but as much as freedom, really the other side of that coin, the responsibility that we all have. Because we have that freedom, we have this responsibility to look for and seek and follow the voice of God. It's not freedom for freedom's sake. And I think Baptists take the priesthood of all believers to that logical end, that each individual is responsible to hear and follow the voice of God. Each congregation is responsible. And I really appreciate that more than anything about being a Baptist. And that's why I became and have remained one.
Are we moving down this way?
We can. Go for it, John. That sounds great.
I'm Baptist because there are still Baptists who will pay me to be their pastor.
Yeah, that's true. I knew we'd had transparency before it's all over. Yeah.
Now we're getting honest.
Yeah, great.
Fred, you kind of pointed to something. I've started saying I am Baptist, I am not a Baptist. And so the things that are a part of our tradition that remain challenges and aspirations, they will be a part of me, whatever I am and whatever I do. They have more to do with who I am than what I do. As long as I can do that in the Baptist church, I'm thrilled. And I'm very happy that I have been able to do that. But when there comes a time when I feel like I cannot be the Baptist I'm called to be, because no one's going to support that, then I will happily be something else and consider myself Baptist by doing so.
I guess for me, I guess I could go with a more, but music and food. I mean, yeah. I mean, I was born Baptist and have remained Baptist and will probably remain Baptist. And I think to echo, kind of along a different lines of looking at freedom, is that I feel like Baptists have an ability to meet challenges in a way that Baptists can bend but not break. A lot of other Christian traditions I know, and I love the plurality of religious traditions that exist. But I feel like for me personally, the Baptist faith offers a way for me to meet the challenges of modernity in a way where I don't have to concede my faith or change my faith, but Baptists offer a freedom where it can bend, but it's not going to break. And I think that for me is probably along the lines of freedom in that sense, why I still identify with the Baptist tradition.
I think, of course, I would echo what all of my colleagues have said. And for me, the issue of freedom is what has tied me to the Baptist church and the Baptist expression of faith. And yet it's the thing that has been threatened most in my life, particularly in the last year. The freedom of conscience, the freedom to interpret Scripture, to be called, to be a person who is called by God to serve in a ministerial capacity, makes freedom very near and dear to me, particularly as a woman in the Baptist faith. And yet, the very thing that I hold so dear continues to be threatened by fellow Baptists. And I find that interesting and I find it difficult, but it makes me all the more stubborn and all the more stuck to that tradition of freedom in hopes that it is not lost and in hopes that it is not the Baptist community that sees it done in. And perhaps that's one of my fears for the future, but I think Fred said something that's true. Baptist is as much about a way of being, a way of thinking, a way of practicing a faith, as it is a polity or a denominational entity. And I'm thankful for that, because if it were not for that, I might not be able to fulfill the calling that God has, I think, directly placed on my life. So freedom is quite valuable to me.
Freedom seems to be the unanimous choice of all of us. Andrew, you said that Baptists can bend but not break, and it is true that to some extent the Baptist experience has been a sort of a synthesis of foundational beliefs as well as cultural influences, and we've kind of had both. What are those places in the 21st century where Baptists there are some characteristics that Baptists perhaps need to reinterpret or discard altogether, or are there any at all? And we don't have to go in a line. We can engage this more. And panel, if you'd like to ask or follow up some questions of your fellow panelists, that would be okay too. We don't want to be too formal.
Stacy said something great about, because as Baptists we're all free, the individual is free and the church is free, and we all kind of have our local kind of quirky traditions in all of our churches, and of course we should always be I think reevaluating all of those. I'm kind of I just toed the line really hard. I think that the Baptist identity as a whole is sound, and I go back to Billy's 4 fragile freedoms of Bible freedom, soul freedom, church freedom, and religious freedom. I think that identity is sound. But I think it's of paramount importance that we do find ways to reinterpret what it means to practice soul freedom in a pluralistic society. Like I said a few minutes ago, what does it mean to really practice the Bible freedom that Bailey is talking about when there are Baptists down the street who disagree with us?
Right.
And perhaps maybe that's something that we need to look at. Historically, Baptists, we have multiplied by dividing, right? I'll take my ball and go play somewhere else with people who see things like I do. I'll take my potato salad and go eat it with people who who agree with me. But I think we need to celebrate soul freedom to the point that allows us to engage and maintain partnerships with those we disagree with. I think, and I think that is historically a core value of Baptist life, be it fellow Baptists we disagree with, or ecumenical relationships, or even non-Christians in our increasingly secularist age. What are some kind of common places in the community we can work? I think too often we want to pick up and go home when we meet resistance, and I think that in our modern society we have to really reevaluate what it means to practice soul freedom in a practical sense.
At Woodbrook, the main conversation is not about what core principles need to be jettisoned, but whether or not the name needs to be, because of associations in the culture. Everyone I'm comfortable talking to about Baptists are very proud of what they understand Baptist to mean, and terrified of what they think Baptist in general means or is heard as. A friend of mine said if they're looking for us, they're not looking for Baptists, and if they're looking for Baptists, they're not looking for us. So the conversation at Woodbrook is, well, Woodbrook, it's the Southern Baptist. Now that they've ruined the name, they're trying to decide whether they want to keep it. There was a study in South Carolina by Southern Baptists, and they determined, this was what, 2 years ago? They determined that the only Southern Baptist churches growing in the state of South Carolina were the ones that did not have Baptist in their name. You know, Grace Community, whatever. There are now cultural definitions of what Baptists mean that have nothing to do with what I understand Baptist to mean, and yet they're the ones that are driving the conversation.
That's a good question for all of you as you're at the outset of this engagement. Is the name a deal breaker? Not the principles, but the name.
We haven't chucked it yet, but it comes up every time we talk about, how do we reach out to the community? That's on the table. Do we get rid of our name? Do we get the sign on in front of the church? People drive by and they will not come in.
I guess it requires being more intentional with relationships that you form with people. And you could go to more discipleship. I can come up with an example. I had a small class recently 2 semesters ago, where it was a religious liberty seminar in the government department at the College of William and Mary, and there were a number of students in that class who I had no idea who they were because I'm not a government major, and it was primarily only government majors and then me. And I was taking the class after interning with the Baptist Joint Committee. So the professor introduces me saying, and Andrew interned with the Baptist Joint Committee, and you see the looks on people's faces. And it's one of those things where it is. It's the name. Does the name become something that really really turns people off? I can guarantee you after that class, all 14 other students loved the Baptist Joint Committee, because they were all people that identified with a lot of what the Baptist Joint Committee stood for. So, I mean, it required being intentional, going out and kind of reclaiming the name in a sense, saying not all Baptists are, we don't even have to say Southern Baptists. We could go Westboro. I mean, they're even...
Let's not.
True, but I think, it requires mending bridges for people that may identify themselves as Christian, may identify themselves as Baptist, that we have, in a sense, a responsibility for their mistakes as well, as a greater body of Christ, I think. Even though we may disagree with them and may think that they have everything wrong, we have a responsibility to show Christ's love, I feel like, as Baptists, and to not just say, well, let's leave the name of Baptist or whatever. I don't know.
We're certainly a dysfunctional family. And as hard as it is to admit sometimes, I think we are still family. And we do have to own the shortcomings of our Baptist family members. And I agree. I think a lot of the churches, the Baptist churches who are taking the Baptist out of their names, are the kind of Baptists that we don't want to be anyways, in a lot of sense. But I think this is an important thing that kind of shows, I know we're having a conversation on Baptist identity today, but this is kind of where it shifts to Baptist identity tomorrow and in the future is what I'm sensing from my generation is we really don't care what our name is. And we really don't care what's on the church sign, because it's not about people driving by and seeing a sign that they resonate with and coming into those doors and worshiping in that church. Is how are we bearing witness outside of those four doors? How are we bearing witness to what it means to be Baptist outside of the church building, rather than trying to get people to stop by? We can put up flashy signs and think of lots of creative names to call our organizations, but it really doesn't mean anything if they don't bear witness to what we're getting at. And so I would say that for me, the Baptist name, I'm going to own it. I'm not going to be the one that takes it off of the church sign. If you do, that's fine. But we have bigger problems than the name that's on our church sign.
I agree with you as it relates to some of what you said about what people see associated with Baptist. A part of what I feel like I'm seeing as well is that persons are shopping for an experience. And sometimes the name on the front of the church does not matter because persons are looking for an experience. So what happens once I get inside of the building? How does the music sound? What is the preacher saying? And the name might not be the first thing that really resonates with the person who's shopping for an experience. So I come, I get a great experience, and it just happens to be a Baptist church. I might find a similar experience in a quote-unquote non-denominational church. And so, I think it's interesting. And sometimes I'm curious and I believe that it's not even about the witness that we have outside of the church as much as it is about what is taking place on the inside. Does it have a youth ministry where I feel comfortable with my kids getting a moral education that I feel has some kind of deeper meaning in time and space and eternity? And so the experience, so where I'm going with this is that the name for some of us is a deal breaker. But for, I think, more and more people, the name can go just like you all have said, but it's something different besides what is the witness outside of the congregation. For some, it's what's going on in terms of the way I feel once I get in, which is why, to an extent, I think some persons gravitate to some of these mega churches because the experience is so wonderful. And persons are never attached to the principles that guide necessarily the denominational foundation that church has, if it has a denominational foundation. But I just felt good after. It was just a wonderful time. And that's what really stays in the person's mind, is just that experience, and not necessarily a name. But for some of us, like you said, I'm not getting rid of Baptist on the name of the church because, again, the principles that Baptist has represented for so long, why throw that out? Because it's a wonderful marker that says we are people who represent something meaningful, something substantive, and something that is born out of this larger experience of faith in Christianity.
So I'm hearing you say two things, really, that it's the principles, which are more important than the name, but also that the key to a new appreciation of the word Baptist will come not from a Martin Agency ad campaign, but from relational experiences. I'm assuming that Stacy and Bailey, you have probably been able to persuade folks of the rightness of your call, not by a theological treatise, but by your own relationships. I'm wondering if that's relevant in the same way in trying to create a way of understanding Baptists in a positive way.
I think so. And I think, like it or not, we're not getting away from the name anytime soon. no matter how you feel about it. Personally, I don't want to let the name go. I don't know if it's a deal breaker or not, but for me, that's how I identify my expression of my Christian faith for the reasons that we listed earlier. But I think serving in a very practical context where I am in a local, rural, North Carolina church, the name means everything. And in many ways, it has been hijacked from its truest foundations and meaning. My worry is that tomorrow and in the future, no one will understand these principles in relation to the name Baptist. If you talk to the youth in my church, the children in my church, even the adults in my church, they know nothing about Bible freedom and soul freedom. That language is foreign to them. They don't have that language. So I agree that it's relational. It's about the kind of witness that we bear to the gospel in our communities. But what level of education are we now providing to our congregations, to people who would claim the Baptist name, at better understanding why it is that they do that? We're having some very simple classes at my church, why I am a Baptist. I never thought that I would be having to teach those classes, but I am. And it would make me proud as a pastor if individuals in my church could come to claim the name of Baptist and it be more than a cultural reality for them. It'd be more than just what mama and daddy told them to be and do. It's something that they identify with. And I think you're right. The way that we, as you said, brought people to our cause or changed minds in our context and in our situation with being removed from a Baptist organization. We did that relationally. We did that by bearing witness to these principles, but we also did it through education. We did it through a dialogue and conversations and coffees and lunches, whether they were formal or informal. And suddenly, in the tiny town of Mount Airy, North Carolina, we're having conversations about the true diversity of the Baptist family. And there are folks in my context now who are realizing that there's much more to being Baptist than what they thought. And we are fighting a battle in the state of North Carolina. The Baptist name has been hijacked in the mass media for months now. Many of us are sick at our stomach as we watch, because those of us who really want to protect, I think, the Baptist foundation of separation of church and state, we fight the battle of when to be vocal and when to speak and when to not. And I think Alex or someone mentioned that the folks that we tend to not want to identify with, even though they're in our Baptist family, speak quite loudly. And how do we, as those who would like to uphold and see sustained true Baptist principles, how do we work with our own conscience on responding to folks like that who seem to be promoting something entirely different and yet calling it Baptist?
I have nothing to add other than to acknowledge that this conversation is very different for you in Baltimore than it is in the Shenandoah Valley or it was where I was in Georgia.
Yes.
I can certainly understand why you're having those conversations, and at some point you have to ask yourself, is your loyalty to the principles or is it to the trappings of a tradition? And assuming it's to the principles, that may lead you in a different direction than it would someone like me. I certainly don't want to surrender the Baptist name, but I appreciate where your congregation is coming from.
Yeah, Bailey, I think you take us into a great place with kind of the education that you've done at Flat Rock around the Baptist identity, because I think that's something that's practical that we should all do. You know, Christian education, Sunday school, in addition to Bible study, historically, that's where you kind of learned what it meant to be Baptist. And I think we've forgotten that practice on Sunday mornings. In a world that's becoming more spiritual and not religious, you know, I think in our churches, kind of spiritual formation as a new kind of manifestation of Christian education is a way to kind of reteach the kind of distinct Baptist niche of kind of how to approach the sacred, how we kind of act as Christians. And I think education and spiritual formation is kind of a place that we can do that in our churches. And I think you've done that quite well.
We've all referenced the difference in geography and culture, Georgia and the Shenandoah Valley and Baltimore, and the differences there. And part of that, obviously, that the diversity that creates is going to continue. It's always been a part of who we are, and part of that diversity has created some of the conversations, debates even that we have, especially over race and ethnicity, over gender roles, and over sexuality. And I'm curious if you think that there is something distinctive about the Baptist movement, the way that we organize Baptist communities of faith, that allows us to reach some kind of resolution on issues like that, without necessarily talking about your particular view on issues of gender roles or of sexuality. That would be the wild and ruckus conversation that Fred wanted us to have. But I'm wondering if, as we increasingly face those kinds of conversations, is there something about the distinctive Baptist way of organizing our communities that allows us to reach some kind of resolution or consensus on it? Or are there some things that are distinct about our Baptist organizational ways that also stymie us, that keep us from reaching that consensus or resolution on social and moral issues?
I want to jump in because I've had the experience, of course, of being Baptist all of my life, but also of attending a Roman Catholic Jesuit institution. And the difference that in the Catholic experience, the Roman Catholic experience, that one places on authority versus the experience in the Baptist life in terms of how one understands authority. I mean, it just differs so much. I sit back sometimes and I pay attention to the conversations that happen in church business meetings, and I wonder sometimes, how do we really understand what it means to be an authority on a matter? Because to an extent, in Baptist life, every person who has a Bible in hand and can read a Bible, even if the person can't read a Bible and just says, the word of the Lord came to me, really is an expert in our congregations. And we can't necessarily dispute the faith claims that someone has. I mean, we try to, but the bottom line is everyone is free to interpret one's experience the way he or she sees fit. So here you have this pastor who goes to a McAfee School of Theology, takes all of these courses in Old Testament and New Testament and church history, and then spends more than 40 hours a week worrying about the congregation, praying about it, learning about it. And at a church business meeting, everyone can come and say, no, that's not right. You're not the authority on this. I am. Where in other traditions, it varies, but there are these authorities who have a kind of, if it's not a final word, it's definitely an influential word that shapes the direction that the group takes. And so when you talk about having some kind of resolution over these controversial matters, I don't know if we'll ever all agree or really have, I won't say binding, but somewhat binding resolutions about controversial issues. I mean, if we did, the racial questions might have been solved a long time ago, and there would be no Southern and Northern Baptist, or the American Baptist wouldn't have had such a split of its body over the issues of sexuality. So I don't know, but I think that issue of authority is a big one when we talk about how that plays in whether or not we can get to some kind of resolve over such controversial matters or such ruckus talk. So.
One of the things that this somewhat ties into something you talked about, the Baptists, where they need to head next. One of the things that I've been encouraged to see somewhat has been the decline of the denomination, because I feel like Baptists as a whole have forfeited their local autonomy, they've forfeited their personal autonomy, and they just sort of take and do whatever is handed down to them from the institution. And that makes it really easy for, well, whatever the institution says, we all need to line up. You're either with us or you're against us. Because of the decline of the denomination, it seems like, and this is potentially naive, but it does seem like the partnering of local churches now is increasingly toward the original purpose, and that is cooperative missions. We're less expectant that the board gives us all of our resources and more expectant that together we can do ministry. It seems like there is at least room, and I don't know whether or not we'll embrace that, but it seems like there is room for more diversity in that kind of understanding of partnership, Baptist partnership. If it is for the purpose of spreading the gospel, then maybe we'll just start fighting on what kind of gospel we spread. We are Baptist after all, but it seems like there's potential for more collaboration with that understanding of what it means to partner with other churches.
There's an interesting possibility, I think, in all this, and I think there's a lot of room for some conversation about the difference between the priesthood of all believers, that means every believer is autonomous, and the priesthood of all believers, that is, we are in a conversation together and we establish some parameters within which we have this conversation. And you tie that together with this idea of the autonomy of the local church, and I think, you can go too far with this, and there's a dangerous dimension to it. But I think we are in a place where we can say we don't believe in an absolute truth that we impose on everyone. We believe in a localized truth that is in keeping with the incarnation of God, who comes to very specific circumstances and deals with those. And what Jesus says in Palestine, Jesus might not say in Baltimore. And what I say in Baltimore might not be what Stacy says in Harrisonburg. Mm-hmm. Now, I think we've done a terrific job of undermining the best of who we are. And someone was telling me, some of you may know, the point at which in Southern Baptist life, the person who had been the secretary became the president. Don't know that? Well, if I made it up, it's a great story. The general, at first, the person who we now call the president of the convention was called the general secretary. Well, at some point, they flipped that. And I think, you have the authority of an infallible whatever, and then you have the authority of the servant leader. And I think part of the Baptist gift is, I'm your pastor. Here's what I think. I might be wrong. But this is based on my study. This is based on my experience. And this is part of our conversation as a local congregation. And we will work this out together. And we don't have to arrive at the same conclusion that the Baptist church down in wherever comes up, or even across the street. I think Baptist principles have an amazing potential for the future. Whether we can overcome what we've done with those, I don't know.
Robert, resolutions and authority terrify me. Mm-hmm. Because they're great when they work in our favor, but they're dangerous when they don't. And I agree that individuals can have resolutions. Churches can maybe kind of have affirming values that they fall back on, and all of that is kind of a local narrative. Hopefully, one day on that great getting up morn that stretches towards the universal horizon, But you did ask about social issues specifically and how we get at that from our Baptist perspective. And one, I think it's a Christian perspective. When asked what we can leverage our lives for in order to make them count, Jesus says, love God and love others. And I think in a country that values words like liberty and justice and equality, as Christians, we have a responsibility to make sure that everyone gets to experience that, whether we agree with them or not. I think as Baptists, again, our principles speak to that in unbelievable ways. The story that I think of, and I wish the pastor of this church was here, he could tell the story much better than I can, of Metro Baptist Church in Hell's Kitchen, New York City.
That's my song.
Oh, okay. You knew where I was going then. Okay. In the tradition of Walter Rauschenbusch, the great social gospel, father of the social gospel movement. They call it Hell's Kitchen for a reason. All kinds of sinners hang out in Hell's Kitchen. But Rauschenbusch and Metro is meeting their needs directly from a Baptist perspective. They're not changing their names. They're letting their identity speak to various social issues, from gender equality to sexuality to income inequality. And I just think that we, talking about things happening in the 21st century that we need to reinterpret our identity in order to address, social issues have to be at the top. We all have to sit down and have those conversations as churches and as individuals.
You guys have been remarkably restrained, and I wonder if there are. I've got a lot more questions that we could certainly ask, but let's see if there are some directions that we haven't gone in that you'd like to try to take us. If there are some questions you'd like to ask, ask it.
Could I respond to something John said? You were talking about, I think you were talking about what a relief it is not to have all the authority in your congregation, to invite others into that conversation, and we're going to make this decision together. My church here in Richmond went through a significant decision about our identity and about who could be a member just a couple of years ago. And I remember through all of this being able to remain remarkably calm and at peace, because I knew that this decision was not up to me ultimately. We would make it together. So we could talk about it for 2 years if that's what it took. And we could ask all the questions, and we could have all the conversations, and even a few arguments about it. But in the end, we would make this decision together. That gives me a sense of peace about addressing other, perhaps even more difficult issues. That we say, friends, we need to do this together as a congregation. And I'm not the one who makes the decision for you. We will make it as a body. So it gives me a sense of peace about my role as a leader in a congregation. I can start the conversation, but I don't have the ultimate authority, and I don't make the final decision on those things. I love that about being Baptist.
That does seem to be a theme about that.
Robert,
Yes, ma'am.
I have a question for the two women on the panel. Some 30 years ago, Wally Amos Criswell, who was pastor of First Baptist Church, Dallas, Texas, was interviewed by Bill Moyers. And Moyers said, what do you think about women who are called to the ministry? And Criswell answered, women are not called by God. They are called by their own ambition. Now, my question to you is, have you ever run into anything like that as women pastors? And how long will it take before a woman can be pastor of First Baptist Church, Dallas?
Yes, I've experienced things like that, and much worse. My calling has been questioned so many times I've lost count. Whether it's about my own ambition, my ego, my sinful nature, my sexuality, you name it, it's been put on the table and it's been put under the microscope. And I've had countless numbers of men and women tell me that I am called for every reason under the sun except that it is God who has placed a calling on my life. And it is difficult and it is tough. I had a conversation recently that I think takes us to an interesting place based on your question, in that in light of current Baptist realities and a movement or a wave of women in ministry finding positions, finding their voice, which is a wonderful thing, I was asked, do you find yourself getting caught up in that and allowing your ambition or your ego to play a part in that? First, I was a little offended and a little thrown off, but as I let myself settle into the question, it was a decent question. I think there is a difference in faithfully and authentically pursuing the person that God would have me to be and living into that and allowing myself to get caught up in a movement or becoming someone's poster child or the token, whether it be on a panel like this. how many times have I been asked to be sort of the token voice representative of women in ministry? I think that's when it can get dangerous, because maybe there is a certain level of self that gets involved and a desire just to show them that I can do this. And honestly, when I came to Mount Airy and I started having signs go up around town about me, I had people damning me to hell in the frozen food section at Walmart. There is a certain level, a certain piece of you that wants to say, you know what, you cannot tell me that I cannot do this. Yes, I can. But I take greater comfort in resting in the fact that, yes, I can because I am called. And I think I have to go back to that language. And I'm sure Stacy would probably agree with me that to rest and to settle into the language of, yes, I am called. And I'm being equipped and I'm being prepared to do the ministry that God would have me to do. That is the right place for me to land. So yes, I think eventually there might be a pastor at that church, and probably many others, because I think the people in Mount Airy would tell you that they never fathomed that there would be a female pastoring Flat Rock Baptist Church. And yet, here we are.
You know, I really haven't had the external experience that Bailey has. I have not had picketing. I've not had signs.
God bless you for that.
Yeah. I would say that the biggest questions related to that have come internally. I did come from a conservative background. There were many times where I asked myself, is this about ambition? And being in front of the scripture and saying to myself one night in my college dorm room, you know, if you have made me to cook barefoot and pregnant in the kitchen, really, if that's what it looks like to be faithful, then that is what I will do, because that is who and what I want to be. And in that moment, just feeling like God released me of that is not what he was asking of me. That's not what faithfulness looked like. Now, so at the beginning, it was never about ambition. And I do feel, because I wrestled with it and doubted it for years, it is that much stronger and firmer and less likely to be rattled when the picketing begins, if it ever does. But once you sort of get that checked, it is true. I get a lot of opportunities because I'm young and female. And you have to remind yourself, what is it you're doing this for?
Yes.
I'm doing this for the Lord. And it's an important reminder and a place to check myself.
Thanks, Roberta. Good question. Isa. Yeah.
In the beginning, several of you emphasized the personal freedom that's inherent with the Baptist understanding. The negative fruit of individual freedom is radical individualism. And I think it's one of the negative aspects with which my generation has grown up. It's my faith, it's my Lord, it's my church, it's mine. And we lack a corporate sense of the corporate understanding of the church and what the church is to do, what the church is to speak to in our times. And I wonder if we can hope that the younger generation is open to more corporateness, or are you dealing with the same thing that my generation has dealt with, in that we think of faith as it's mine, it's personal, and I don't want you to tell me that it has anything to do with immigration. I don't want you to tell me it has anything to do with relating to minorities. Is there a hope that we can overcome the radical individualism, which is very Baptistic?
Good
That's
question.
my dad.
Congratulations. Andrew, you have a look on your face. Yeah.
You know, I think for me, one of the steps forward in that, because, I mean, that is a really big problem, I think, that the Baptist tradition has, is that it can lead to such radical individualism, and it neglects the community of believers that has existed since the time of Christ. That we are part of a tradition that's not 400 years old, but it's 2,000 years old. We come from a tradition that starts off with the Catholic Church. And I think I think one of the things that can help that I would like to see more of is the emphasis on the virtues, and particularly patience and humility. When it comes to reading scripture, when it comes to making decisions, that the decision could take 2 years, it could take 4 years, it could take 5 years. We have to be patient that we're going to come to the right decision. But we have to be humble that even the decision we come to may not be right, and that those around us may have a better decision and may have come to a better conclusion. And I think, you know, you look at how we have to look at the past that we have and whether or not the past has made right decisions. We have to look to the future and how the future, new things may be, just new readings of scripture may come to light. We may read a scripture one day that speaks to us differently. And because I feel like 1,000 times I hear pastors and Christians all the time saying, you know, myself included, that, you know, hey, I read scripture and then, you know, I read it, you know, the next year and it says something completely different to me. Well, we have so many people that read, you know, say, you know, I don't want to bring up terrible issues on social justice, but you read issues of homosexuality where you read it, that's my interpretation, that's it, that's what it is. You know, we have to be patient and humble that somehow we may find another reading one day that may touch us differently one day. And I feel like returning to teaching the virtues within our community and having a community of character and stuff that builds up virtues in people can help to kind of limit that radical individualism that can become so rampant in Baptist life.
Yeah, it's definitely a pitfall to our movement, especially today. And I like, Andrew, where you went with the virtues, and I would add self-control to that. Because I think, you know, to whom much is given, much is required, and with such great freedom comes a great responsibility. Jim Wallace has a great quote that says, "God is personal, but God is never private." And I think we can read the gospel and see that Jesus was very personal, but never private. And fellowship kind of permeated throughout his movement among his close group of friends, but also in the larger community. And I think for any Baptist who wants to use soul freedom as an excuse to not participate in fellowship, you know, needs to take that up with Jesus personally. But I would also add, and this is something that I've learned and that we've dealt with at Piney Grove, because we had an issue with radical individualism for a little while, and we went back to kind of the Baptist practice of maintaining a covenant community, of what does it look like for a community to have a covenant that we hold one another to, that is, sure, consistently revised as culture changes, or as we as individuals grow in our faith, or as our faith journey takes us down different avenues that we didn't expect. But nonetheless, we have a covenant with one another. And sure, there are times where we dissent or disagree with the covenant and maybe come in and out of the community, but as a core, our communities are founded around a covenant. And I think that's a place that our identity can kind of get at that individualism, is getting back to just kind of the basic foundations of, yes, we're a free people, but we're also a covenant people.
But I think this points to another conversation between the church and culture, because I think that's descriptive of our culture, the privatization, you know, the hyper-individualism, the American dream, the Protestant work ethic. And I think there's a lot of conversation about how the church and how Christians are supposed to claim a prophetic voice within culture. And I think that conversation has been driven in a lot of ways by some agendas. And I think we can claim some very appropriate ways of I'd love to see Baptists take on materialism instead of some of these other things they've gotten hyped up about. I think we've chosen the wrong things to get mad at. And you look at what Jesus talked about most, and it was money. So I think it's very difficult to separate this is characteristic of the church and this is characteristic of the culture, because they've become so close. And how we want to divide them again, oh, that's a rich one.
I look around the room and see that most people here have had some experience in denominational life, and this really is relevant to that whole question, actually, that Stacy, you were saying about a decline of a denominational life. Even though we highlight the local church among Baptists in the 20th century, it was the denomination that we fought over and identified with primarily. I suspect we'll still collaborate and network. I wonder what that will look like. How will it avoid the radical individualism that you've mentioned, but at the same time collaborate in a structural way, not just in a friendly, social way, but ways that would be structural? What will it take for a denomination, CBF of Virginia, the CBF of North Carolina, the BGAV, for you to find that an appealing way to participate? They'd love to know the answer to those questions. All those organizations would.
I think shared experience is part of that. We are figuring that reality out together in Surry County, North Carolina. And I hate to keep harping on it, but it's our experience in the last year, so it's the context that I'm coming from. But Piney Grove, which is where Alex is, and First Baptist, and Calvary Baptist in Mount, several others, in light of our experience with the local Baptist institution, with the association, and the way that we were treated, it caused a reaction and a discussion among our brothers and sisters locally, and it created a bond, a common shared experience around a particular event, around an issue. And for me, we had a lot of rampant individualism in my church when I first came, when they were in the process of calling me, and we had some that were so strong in their beliefs and faith that they left the church before I even really came into the picture. But we had many others who, in spite of their strong individual faith, decided to stay because the corporate reality, the local church, meant enough to them that they wanted to stay, and they were willing to stay and be a part of that dialogue. And probably one of the most hopeful things I've experienced in the last year is observing my congregants, whether with one another or with me, sitting down with one another and saying, I'm really glad we went through this together because I am different now, or my mind was changed, or I'm sorry that I spoke to you in this way. I'm sorry that I tried to take away your freedom of interpretation. And we've had conversations like that. That is very hopeful for me to watch. We've had it within our church. We've had it with other churches in our area. And suddenly, we're in CBF North Carolina, but suddenly it's a very appealing reality because organizations like CBF of North Carolina are helping to facilitate real practical structural ways for churches like Alex's and mine to be related to one another because we've been through the trenches together. And we've come out on the other side better people, maybe a little bruised and battered, but we find value in that experience. And so we rally around that. And we're willing to enter into covenant relationships because of that.
And that shared experience has allowed members of both churches and in the community to think about things in ways that they never had before. When we talked about interpreting scripture and kind of social presence, it's almost like it's given people the freedom to think outside of the box that they had been in for so long. And the experience was very much shared. Bailey's church was removed from the association, and we followed. We said, if you're going to do this to them, you're going to do this to us. And shared experience moved our people in a way that we otherwise could not. And one thing that I think allowed us and suited us to be in a position to kind of embrace the Flat Rock story as the Piney Grove story and vice versa was I just love what Larry Hovis is doing with CBF of North Carolina of being a missional organization and equipping local churches to be missional churches. Because one thing I've seen, whether I'm talking to middle school and high school students, college students, young adults, is, and this is kind of goes back to the cultural piece, is I think as a culture today, emerging generations aren't nearly as individualistic as previous generations. And I think emerging generations want things that are active, that they can live. And I think young Christians today and young Baptist Christians today want a faith that rolls up its sleeves and gets its hands dirty. And you
They
know,
want a countercultural faith.
yeah, absolutely.
If we will give it to them.
Absolutely.
If we will provide them the tools
Absolutely.
to be that and live that. I agree with you. I think they crave something that's countercultural.
Yeah, they want.
I don't know that they always find it.
Yeah. Well, hopefully they'll find it. They want a faith that
They're
is-
not with
that
us
is-
sometimes. And that's where the disappointment comes in. I mean, that's where you get the disenchantment with the Baptist expression of faith a lot of time, with the younger generations.
I'm a bit more optimistic. But they certainly want a faith that is living and active and has relevance when these issues arise, be they social issues or organizational issues. And that's what we've seen. And back to how I answered the first question is, I still believe and have hope that our distinctly Baptist identity and witness, that our distinctly Baptist witness to the gospel has tons to say on all of those issues.
Could I ask a question? And you teach it at the Proctor School in theology. And I've been in a couple different conferences and things recently, and I guess one of the things that interests me is with young voices, those that are in the academic world, and then they go out with all of that wonderful knowledge, and then they go into a local church, and they go to about 2 business meetings, and they go, "This is messed up. I don't want to do this." How do we deal with the tension of those students who have all those answers and then enter into a congregation that isn't necessarily against them but can't turn that fast, and yet keep them engaged in the local church? Because I feel like sometimes they come out or in seminary as well, and they enter into that church, and they get on a staff, and they get excited, and they bring all that energy, and the pastor's behind them, and 2 deacons are behind them, and then they meet the rest of the church. And they get washed.
That's a great question. And I see sometimes the other end of the encounter that you just described, and that is the move to conformity. So you come out very idealistic, you're ready to take on the world, and then you attend the business meetings, you might go to the ministers' conference meeting, and all of a sudden you realize that in order to somewhat thrive, if that's how you want to label it, you have to conform to a certain way of functioning. And so you get persons coming back for the alumni functions and things of that nature, and you ask them what they're up to, and you find them in the same mode as the persons who have been in ministry for 20 years. And that's not saying that's bad. I'm not saying that's all bad. What I will say is, I'll use myself as an example. I came out of seminary 25, ready to go into the academy because I really wanted to learn more about how we arrived at where we are. And that's why I did the plunge into a church history degree. And once I saw how we arrived at where we are, then I felt like, okay, now we can move in a different direction. Let's start having some conversations about what we've been and how we can get back to that. And I found that sometimes we are not, as in congregations, as self-critical and as open to having conversations that help us think maybe a little differently than how we do it. So then, you come every Sunday, the bulletin and order of worship remains the same, the activities remain the same, and there's little room for conversation about how we begin to relate to the persons that you all say are looking for something countercultural. I think about sitting in Sunday school class, and I can give you the responses for everyone in the Sunday school class before everyone even says it. Well, that's because Jesus wants us to be this way. Or that's because we're supposed to pray our way through these circumstances. And there's never a conversation that maybe doesn't always say that's because Jesus wants us, that really begins to explore various options. And so I don't know is where I'm going with this. But I do know that I am also hopeful that the idealism does not die with those first encounters at the business meetings, and that people learn how to communicate all of this great knowledge that they've received in the seminary, in the graduate classrooms, and learn how to translate that knowledge in ways that are real and faithful to their own being, as well as relevant for the persons who receive how they're trying to do ministry. But I don't know. It just doesn't seem to change that fast. So.
And I would say that's also on you all. I mean, you all are the Sunday school teachers, you're the deacons, you're church members, you go to those business meetings, and it's on you to talk to the people who are talking in the parking lot and say, we're not going to do that. If we have something to say, we're going to say it in the business meeting. And it's on you to tell someone that was an inappropriate thing to say. And it's on you to say, you know, humility, self-control. These are things that we want to characterize us, not just in our sermons and not just in our hymns, but in our wild, rompous business meetings. And create a help. We're going to do the hard work to create a healthy congregation so that not only can a minister come here and thrive, but we can.
Yeah, we've all hit those brick roads, right, where our hopes and dreams for ministry hit the realities of kind of the nitty-gritty church work, you know. And I'll speak as someone who, as Fred said, is fresh out and about to begin as a senior pastor, helplessly idealistic as well.
Alex.
That one thing, you know, what has allowed Piney Grove to go to the places it has gone has been our pastor, Mark Reeves, who was willing to, before we had any of these conversations, just be an outstanding pastor. Practice the ministry of presence and pastoral care. And you know, he's been our pastor for 3 years and he's only 29. And you know, we have a phenomenal story, and again, I wish he was here to tell that story, but it's been his insistence on being a good shepherd, a good pastor that provides the pastoral needs for the people. And I've been frustrated a lot, even recently, and I've found myself almost every other day reading Jesus' Emmaus Road, the narrative down the Emmaus Road, where, you know, he's walking with these guys and he's sharing conversation. He's talking about their own religious history. He's engaging them in the conversations. And they get to Emmaus and the guys are going inside, and Jesus acts as if he's going to keep walking down that road. He's going to go with them as far as they want to go. But they insist that he stop and stay with them. And then he stops and he lingers with them and has a meal, and that's when they reveal, when they kind of realize who they're talking to. And I think as pastors and church leaders, we've got to be willing to lead our people and walk as far down the road as they'll follow us. But when they need to stop and linger places, we have to be willing to go into those places and break bread, trusting that in those moments the presence of Christ will be revealed. Because I think just because we get off the road doesn't mean the conversations stop. But once we break bread and we have that revelation, we get right back on that road, hopefully, and on to the next issue.
See, I think that's easier said than done sometimes in terms of that whole leader position. That I wonder sometimes if the congregation really is the leader when it comes to some settings of what it means to do ministry. And I just say this because sometimes I just believe that salary, that pastoral compensation, and the desire to hold on to the pastoral compensation sometimes outweighs the desire to be the leader of a congregation or co-leader, however you want to put it. And that leads to compromise. And not to say that pastoral leaders should not compromise. I just wonder if persons are compromising a little more than they ought. And that's why we're still where we are. And that's the whole idea of conformity that all of a sudden everyone ends up looking like, I'll give you an example. In many African American Baptist settings, there has been this move towards opening the worship experience with praise teams. So you have these wonderful persons who have beautiful voices, and they open with some kind of song or series of songs. And it used to be, when I was growing up, that the deacons led the kind of opening devotion into the worship experience. But all of a sudden, one church got a praise team, then another got a praise team, and then before you know it, everyone on the block had a praise team. But not every congregation had those voices who could. And so I don't know. I mean, it just, to me, we end up the whole conversation between culture, that we just kind of buy in and model what everyone else is doing. I don't know. That's why it's neat to hear this conversation.
I think it's a complicated dance for which no one knows the steps.
Right.
And I think too many times, instead of being willing to dance with each other, we want to take our ball and go play in another sand pit. And I think Alex hit on something talking about, Mark, the willingness to stick it out with one another, because one of two things either happens. A younger minister, and Larry Hovis said this to me not long ago, you'll appreciate this, that ministers now are being prepared for a church 30 years into the future, and they're pastoring churches 30 years behind. And I think that's true. So the gap is widening, and either young ministers are coming in and being very passionate and not willing to compromise, and they're hitting a brick wall and they go play somewhere else. And in the same time, and I don't think we young ministers are often willing to admit this, we abuse and beat up on these congregations a little too quickly. The pastoral role is a role of trust and long-term relationship, and because Mark was willing to be in relationship and to walk with them, he gained trust and he gained the ability to push on them. But it's a slow process, and we are not a generation that wants to take it slow. I think we have to be willing to admit that about ourselves. And we work with a church that doesn't like change, and it does move slow. And so how do we dance with each other in that reality? And at the same time, how do you not get to the point that ministers become disenchanted? And I think you're being very prophetic and very honest, and that we get to the point where those salary packages become more important than our principles and our values. And what a dance. I just keep using, that's the metaphor in my mind. That's the image, is the dance. And I think the key is somehow being willing to stay engaged with your partner. And that's a tough thing to do.
Well, I think I've been waiting for an hour and a half for some reference to Baptist and dancing, and this seems to be...
The woman got it in.
The woman got it in. Thank you for that. That's a good place for us to conclude. Thank you for your very articulate and really well thought out responses. Really useful. I think all of these folks will be here for a while between now and this evening, so if you'd like to have one-on-one conversations, I'm sure they would be more than happy to do it. And once again, thank you so much. Fred?
Thank you, Robert, and thank each one of you for coming and lending your young voices into the conversation. You know, as Baptists, we all speak the same language, but it is with different pronunciations, the dialects, and this comes to home to me because I've already alluded to the fact, and I don't try to bring it up too many times in my job, but Alex and I are from the great state of Georgia. And, you know, down there, it's not Cairo, it's pronounced Cairo, Georgia. And it's not Lafayette, it's Lafayette. And I have to tell you, Alex, if you're going to spend very much time in the Commonwealth of Virginia, I need to take you aside and tell you, when you were speaking about being on the road to Emmaus, if you go down the road here just a short ways to New Kent County, there's a Baptist church that has that name, only they say Emmaus. So they're Baptists, though, and here's one, Andrew.
My home church is Emmaus Baptist.
So here we are, the same language. We're all Baptists, but we do have our own forms of pronunciation, dialect, and distinctiveness. And thank you all for being a part of the conversation. And in a short time, we'll be a part of the dinner table. Thank you.
Okay.